Okay, this is just a quick overview of what you needed to know for sine and cosine graphs from Activity 5. So when you look at your graphs here, we've got the sine graph down here on the bottom, and then we've also got the cosine graph next to it. Obviously, there are some differences. So what you'll notice with these new graphs, it's a little bit different from graphs that you've seen before with x and y axes, is that the x-axis is now labeled with your radians from your unit circle. So that becomes your x-axis. And then your y-axis is actually a distance. So for sine is associated with your y, so you're looking at your y distance. So here at 0, you're looking at it here. The next one, you're looking at it here for the next one. Okay, cosine would be your x distances. Okay, so at 0, you're looking at it here, and then at pi over 6, you're looking at this distance, and then this distance, and this distance. Keeping in mind, when your x and your y go negative, that's when they're going to fall down below your x-axis here. So that's where those graphs really come from. Now to answer these questions here, we need to use the graphs. So for the sine graph here on the left side, the first thing we're looking at is the domain. So for the domain, we can look at our graph and see that it keeps going in both directions. Why is that? Why does it keep going? Why doesn't it just stop from 0 to 2 pi like we saw when you did it with your pasta? Well, if you look at the circle, we could keep going around and around and around and around the circle. Circles are never ending. Circles have an infinite distance. So that's why in both of our graphs they continue to keep going. So the domain for a cosine and a sine graph is going to be negative infinity to infinity. Okay, and then for your range, you're thinking about your y value. So clearly when we're looking at this, it's going up a certain amount and then it's coming down to hit a low point and then going back up. So there are limitations for your range, both in your sine and your cosine graphs. So what are the limitations on it? If you think back to your unit circle, the highest value that you got was at 2 pi, pi over 2, and 3 pi over 2, and those were 1 for those. Okay, so your range is going to be from negative 1 to 1, and then same thing for cosine, negative 1 to 1. Okay, and then for your y-intercepts, you're just basically looking at your graph. So I believe for these we're looking, well, your y-intercept, so we're just going to have one y-intercept here. So for your sine graph, it's going to be at 0, 0. That's the only one that it's going to have. And then for your cosine graph, this one's different. This one is at 0, 1. X-intercepts, because the domain continues on and on, you're going to have multiple x-intercepts. So here they're limiting it, and they're asking what are the x-intercepts between 0 and 2 pi. Same thing here, 0 and 2 pi. So for your sine graph, we're going to have x-intercepts here, here, and here. So we're going to have those at 0, 0, pi, 0, and 2 pi, 0. Okay, and then for your cosine graph, it's going to look a little bit different. You're only going to have 2 of them. We've got one here, we've got one here. So your x-intercepts there are going to be at pi over 2, 0, and 3 pi over 2, 0. Now for the period, we have to go back and look at the key terms from the very top up here. So we need to remember, maybe you learned this in a physics class or something, a cycle is one piece of a graph that repeats itself over and over again. So for example, if we look at our sine graph, this piece from 0 to 2 pi is repeating itself over and over again. So from here, this is the same as this one. This is a cycle from here to here. The period of the graph is the distance along the x-axis of that cycle. So how long does it take for it to start repeating itself? So in this case, if we look at 0, we're starting the graph here, we're going to go around, and then we're going to get to here, and this is the point where it starts repeating itself again. That would be the period, that distance from here to here, which is 2 pi. Same idea over here, we can go ahead and start at the y-axis, so the y-intercept here. If we start here, we're going to go down, we're going to come back up, and this is the part where we're going to start repeating ourselves again. So from 0 to 2 pi would be our period.